The latest revelations from The Young and the Restless suggest that Patty Williams' carefully constructed web of lies has finally collapsed, setting the stage for her swift arrest and what may become one of the most serious legal battles Genoa City has seen in years. For a time, Patty managed to manipulate the confusion surrounding Jack Abbott's stabbing, presenting herself not as the attacker but as a concerned and vulnerable woman who had somehow become entangled in a dangerous situation. Her accusations against Diane Jenkins Abbott created enough doubt to distract the police and place the Abbott family under enormous pressure. However, Patty's decision to return to Genoa City Memorial Hospital and attempt to finish what she had started proved to be the mistake that destroyed her entire plan. Jack had already come close to death once, and Patty's second attempt might have succeeded if not for the unexpected arrival of a hospital security guard. That interruption prevented her from injecting Jack with a dangerous substance, but it did not immediately end the danger. Instead, it triggered a frantic pursuit through the hospital corridors, a violent confrontation with Diane, and the arrival of law enforcement officers at the precise moment when Patty could no longer explain away what she had done. Jack Abbott's survival now appears almost miraculous when the full sequence of events is considered. The first attack left him critically injured and fighting for his life, while the second placed him within seconds of being poisoned in his hospital bed. For viewers, there was never any uncertainty about Patty's guilt because the audience witnessed both attempts directly. The people of Genoa City, however, were forced to rely on incomplete evidence, conflicting statements, and the testimony of individuals whose motives were far from clear. Patty used that uncertainty to her advantage. She understood that Diane's complicated past made her an easy target for suspicion, particularly when emotions were running high and Jack was unable to identify his attacker. By presenting Diane as unstable and dangerous, Patty hoped to redirect attention away from herself while maintaining access to Jack. It was a bold plan, but one that depended on perfect control. Patty needed everyone to believe her version of events. She needed Jack to remain silent, and she needed the authorities to overlook inconsistencies in her behavior. The moment any of those conditions changed, her story was vulnerable to collapse. The second attempt on Jack's life was considerably less successful than the first, yet it was no less revealing. Disguised in a stolen blue nurse's uniform, Patty entered Jack's room carrying a syringe prepared with a harmful substance. She likely believed the hospital environment would protect her. Medical staff moved in and out of rooms constantly, and a person dressed as a nurse would not immediately attract attention. Patty could approach Jack without causing alarm, administer the injection, and leave before anyone realized what had happened. If Jack died shortly afterward, his death might have been blamed on complications from his original injuries. That would have eliminated the only person capable of directly exposing Patty while allowing her to escape suspicion. Her plan was therefore not only murderous but calculated. She was attempting to turn Jack's fragile medical condition into a weapon, using the natural risks of his recovery to conceal another deliberate attack. Patty's plan failed because a hospital security guard entered the room at the crucial moment. The interruption was accidental, but it changed everything. The guard's arrival prevented Patty from completing the injection and forced her to retreat before she was ready. For loyal viewers, an interruption of this kind may not have been entirely surprising. Patty's increasingly reckless behavior made it likely that someone would eventually catch her in the act. Nevertheless, the true climax came not inside Jack's room but after Patty stepped into the hallway. She had not expected Diane and Kyle Abbott to be nearby, and their appearance transformed her failed murder attempt into a desperate escape. Diane and Kyle had just turned a corner and were able to see the entrance to Jack's hospital room as Patty emerged. Patty was visibly frustrated and disoriented by the security guard's interruption. She had entered the room believing she was moments away from solving her greatest problem, only to be forced out without completing the task. Her agitation made her careless. Rather than moving calmly and maintaining her disguise, she hurried down the corridor, immediately drawing Diane's attention. Diane recognized her and called out, realizing that Patty's presence outside Jack's room could only mean one thing. At that moment, the suspicions, accusations, and fears surrounding Jack's attack were suddenly replaced by a clear and immediate threat. Diane did not have time to analyze the situation or wait for police assistance. She acted instinctively, driven by the knowledge that Patty had already nearly killed her husband and might have just attempted to do it again. Kyle made a different but equally important decision. Instead of joining the chase immediately, he entered Jack's room to check on his father. There, he warned the security guard about the identity of the woman who had just left. Kyle's choice reflected the painful balance he had been forced to maintain throughout the crisis. He wanted Patty stopped, but Jack's safety had to come first. If Patty had already injected him, every second would matter. Kyle needed to know whether his father was conscious, whether his condition had changed, and whether medical assistance was required. By identifying Patty to the guard, Kyle also ensured that the hospital staff understood they were dealing with more than a confused visitor. The woman fleeing the corridor was a suspected attacker who had entered the room under false pretenses. Meanwhile, Diane pursued Patty through the hospital. The sequence had the energy of a traditional cinematic chase, even though the two women were racing through interior corridors rather than speeding down a highway. Doors, corners, and intersecting hallways created constant uncertainty. Diane could not allow Patty to disappear into another part of the building, remove the stolen uniform, or reach an exit. Patty knew that being caught would expose everything, so she ran with the desperation of someone whose freedom depended on escape. The performances made the confrontation feel raw and immediate. Stacey Hyduck's portrayal of Patty captured the character's panic, fury, and survival instinct, while Susan Walters gave Diane the determination of a woman who believed she was pursuing the person responsible for nearly killing her husband. Their physical confrontation was not simply a struggle between two rivals. It represented years of resentment, deception, obsession, and emotional history crashing together in a single moment. Diane eventually caught up with Patty and briefly seized her by the neck and upper clothing, preventing her from continuing down the corridor. For a few seconds, it appeared that Diane had successfully ended Patty's escape. Yet the audience already knew that Patty was still carrying the syringe hidden within the stolen nurse's uniform. That detail made the confrontation far more dangerous than Diane understood. Diane believed she was restraining an unarmed fugitive. Patty, however, still possessed the weapon she had intended to use on Jack. As Diane held her, Patty quickly reached for the syringe and injected her. The move demonstrated how dangerous Patty remained, even when cornered. She was not surrendering, and she was not prepared to face responsibility for her actions. Her instinct was to turn every confrontation into another opportunity for violence. The injection immediately placed Diane at risk. No one could be certain what substance Patty had prepared or how quickly it would take effect. The syringe had been intended for Jack, whose body was already weakened by surgery and blood loss, so the drug could have been extremely powerful. Diane's physical condition was stronger than Jack's, but that did not mean she was safe. She could become dizzy, lose consciousness, suffer respiratory complications, or experience a dangerous reaction before doctors determined what had entered her system. The attack also gave Patty another chance to escape. As Diane weakened, Patty attempted to break free and continue toward the exit. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that she might succeed despite everything that had happened. Fortunately, Kyle and the hospital security guard reached the scene before Patty could get away. Their arrival prevented her from disappearing into the hospital or leaving the building. Kyle was confronted with the terrifying sight of Diane having been attacked while his father remained vulnerable in a nearby room. His fear and anger would have been overwhelming. In the space of only a few minutes, he had discovered Patty outside Jack's room, learned that she had likely attempted another murder, and then watched the same woman injure Diane. Kyle's instinct might have been to attack Patty, but the presence of security and the need to help Diane forced him to focus. He could not allow his rage to create another disaster. Patty needed to be restrained, and Diane required immediate medical attention. The timing became even more important when Detective James Burrow and another officer arrived at the scene. Their presence removed Patty's final opportunity to reshape the story. In the past, Patty had relied on uncertainty and conflicting testimony. This time, she was discovered after fleeing Jack's room while dressed in stolen hospital clothing, carrying a syringe, and standing near Diane immediately after injecting her. Kyle, the security guard, Diane, and the officers could all provide direct evidence about different parts of the incident. The hospital itself would likely have surveillance footage showing Patty entering restricted areas, moving through the corridors, and attempting to escape. Medical staff could examine the syringe and identify the substance inside it. Jack's records could establish that no legitimate injection had been ordered at that time. The stolen uniform could be traced to hospital staff. Each piece of evidence would make it more difficult for Patty to claim that she was misunderstood or falsely accused. Patty, nevertheless, attempted to turn the situation to her advantage. That response was entirely consistent with her history. Characters portrayed by Stacey Hayduck have often possessed an ability to reverse apparent defeat through deception, emotional manipulation, or sudden violence, and Patty followed that pattern once again. Even while surrounded, she may have tried to present Diane as the aggressor. Diane had chased her and physically restrained her, which gave Patty a small fragment of truth she could distort. She might claim that the syringe was for protection, that Diane attacked first, or that she had been trying to help Jack before being threatened. However, those arguments would be difficult to sustain once investigators examined the full context. Patty's presence in Jack's room was unauthorized. Her disguise was stolen. The syringe contained a harmful substance. She fled when recognized. Most damaging of all, the security guard had entered Jack's room before Patty could complete the injection and could describe exactly what she was doing. The failed escape brought Patty's storyline to a dramatic turning point. Her attempt may have briefly evoked the idea of a grand prison break or the famous 1963 war film The Great Escape, but there was nothing heroic about her flight. She was not escaping injustice. She was trying to avoid responsibility after attempting to kill a helpless man in a hospital bed. Diane's intervention ensured that Patty could not simply vanish and create another false narrative from a position of safety. Although Diane paid a serious price when she was injected, her actions gave the authorities enough time to arrive and take control of the situation. In that sense, Diane prevented Patty's greatest escape. Had she hesitated, Patty could have reached an exit, abandoned the uniform, and disappeared before police understood what had occurred. Instead, Patty was caught at the center of a crime scene surrounded by witnesses. Patty's arrest should happen quickly because the evidence against her is overwhelming. She can no longer rely on the lack of direct witnesses that protected her after Jack's first attack. Even if Jack remains unable to speak clearly about what happened, the second incident independently proves Patty's violent intent. Prosecutors do not need to establish every detail of the first stabbing before charging her for the attempted poisoning and the attack on Diane. The second attempt provides a clear pattern of behavior. Patty entered Jack's room under a disguise, possessed a prepared syringe, fled when interrupted, and used the same weapon against Diane. That chain of events strongly supports the argument that she intended to murder Jack and then assaulted Diane to avoid capture. The exposure of Patty's lies will also have major consequences for Diane. Diane has spent much of the crisis facing suspicion and hostility. Patty's accusations turned her into a potential suspect in the attack on her own husband, forcing her to defend herself at a time when Jack was fighting for his life. Diane's complicated history made those accusations believable to some people. She has manipulated others before, concealed truths, and made decisions that damaged the people around her. Patty understood that history and used it as a foundation for her deception. However, the hospital incident changes the entire case. Diane's pursuit of Patty, the stolen uniform, the syringe, and the security guard's testimony all support Diane's claim that Patty was the real threat. The attack on Diane further proves that she was not working with Patty. She was actively trying to stop her. Kyle may experience both relief and fury as the truth emerges. He has been caught between protecting Jack, defending Diane, and dealing with law enforcement officials who may have accepted Patty's accusations too easily. Seeing Patty arrested will not erase the emotional damage. Jack nearly died twice, and Diane may now be facing a medical crisis of her own. Kyle could blame himself for allowing Diane to chase Patty alone, even though he made the reasonable decision to check on Jack. He may replay the moment repeatedly, wondering whether he could have prevented the injection by following sooner. At the same time, he may direct his anger toward Detective Burrow and the police for failing to recognize Patty's deception earlier. From Kyle's perspective, the authorities' hesitation gave Patty the freedom to return to the hospital and make another attempt on Jack's life. Detective Burrow's role will therefore come under scrutiny. He arrived in time to witness the end of Patty's escape, but viewers may question whether earlier investigative mistakes allowed the danger to continue. If Burrow accepted Patty's statements without examining them carefully, he may now have to acknowledge that the investigation was manipulated. A competent detective would need to review every piece of evidence connected to Jack's original stabbing. Patty's new arrest should lead investigators back to the Abbott mansion, the hospital records, surveillance footage, witness statements, and any communications between Patty and Dr. Lawrence Markham. What once appeared to be a complicated dispute involving Diane may now be recognized as a coordinated conspiracy. Dr. Markham's testimony could become the most important element in proving the full scope of the plot. Markham may have supported Patty's false version of events, provided her with medical information, helped her gain access to Jack, or assisted in creating the appearance that Diane was responsible. Once Patty is arrested, Markham's position becomes extremely dangerous. If prosecutors can connect him to the stolen uniform, the syringe, Jack's medical treatment, or Patty's movements, he may face serious criminal charges. His best chance of reducing his own punishment could be to cooperate with Christine Romalotti and reveal exactly how the conspiracy developed. Markham will have to decide whether loyalty to Patty is worth sacrificing his freedom. Any alliance between them was likely built on secrecy and mutual benefit, rather than genuine trust. Patty needed someone with medical knowledge and access, while Markham may have had his own reasons for helping her. Once the police possess physical evidence, their partnership will become a liability. Markham may realize that Patty is too unstable to protect him and too desperate to remain silent. If she believes he betrayed her, she could expose everything in anger. For that reason, he may attempt to speak first and negotiate a deal with the district attorney's office. Christine Romalotti now faces the responsibility of pursuing a case that involves her former sister-in-law and decades of painful history. Christine is recently remarried, but her personal happiness will not protect her from the emotional complexity of prosecuting Patty. She has known the Abbott and Williams families for years, and she understands how deeply Patty's actions have affected Jack, Paul Williams, and everyone connected to them. However, Christine's role as district attorney requires her to separate personal history from legal judgment. She cannot be lenient simply because Patty was once part of her extended family. Jack nearly died twice. Diane was injected with a potentially deadly substance. Hospital staff were endangered, and law enforcement was misled. The crimes are too serious to treat as another temporary emotional breakdown. There is now almost no reasonable doubt about Patty's guilt in the hospital incident. The challenge for Christine will be determining the appropriate charges and deciding how aggressively to pursue punishment. Attempted murder, aggravated assault, theft of hospital property, unlawful possession of a controlled or toxic substance, impersonation of medical personnel, obstruction of justice, and escape-related charges could all become relevant depending on the evidence. If Patty's involvement in Jack's original stabbing is proven, the case becomes even more severe. Christine may also seek conspiracy charges if Markham assisted her. The question of Patty's mental health will inevitably become part of the legal proceedings. Patty has a long history of psychological instability, obsession, identity manipulation, and violent behavior. Her defense may argue that she was not legally responsible for her actions because she was suffering from a severe mental disorder. That argument could influence whether she is sent to prison or placed in a secure psychiatric institution. However, Patty's planning may complicate such a defense. She obtained a nurse's uniform, prepared a syringe, chose a moment when Jack was vulnerable, attempted to conceal her identity, and fled when interrupted. Those actions suggest awareness and purpose. She understood that what she was doing was wrong because she took deliberate steps to avoid detection. Her effort to blame Diane and manipulate investigators also indicates that she understood the legal consequences of her conduct. Justice in Genoa City has often been inconsistent. Characters have committed serious crimes and later returned to ordinary life after brief punishment, medical treatment, or unexpected legal developments. Viewers may therefore question whether Patty will truly face consequences equal to the harm she caused. Jack nearly lost his life. Diane became a target of false accusations. Kyle endured the possibility of losing both parents, and the hospital itself was transformed into a crime scene. A short stay in a psychiatric facility followed by another escape would hardly feel proportionate. Christine will need to ensure that Patty is placed somewhere secure enough to prevent her from repeating the cycle. Patty's history with Jack makes the current crimes even more disturbing. Longtime viewers know that her connection to Jack stretches back more than 4 decades. Patty first appeared in 1980, and her relationship with Jack became one of the show's defining early stories. She married him in 1982, when the late Terry Lester was the first actor to portray Jack Abbott. Their marriage was never a simple romance. It became tied to betrayal, emotional pain, and Patty's growing instability. Jack's behavior during those years contributed to some of Patty's deepest wounds, and she never fully released her obsession with him. The decades that followed transformed Patty from a troubled young woman into one of Genoa City's most unpredictable threats. Her feelings for Jack became distorted by memory, resentment, fantasy, and the belief that they were somehow destined to be together. She repeatedly reinvented herself, used disguises, and manipulated circumstances to remain close to him. In 2010, she even remarried Jack while using another identity, turning what should have been a meaningful commitment into another act of deception. That history helps explain Patty's fixation, but it does not excuse her violence. Her relationship with Jack has become a pattern in which rejection triggers desperation, and desperation leads to dangerous behavior. Patty may believe that Jack betrayed her repeatedly and that Diane stole the life she deserved. From Patty's perspective, Diane is not simply Jack's wife. She represents every loss Patty has refused to accept. Seeing Jack choose Diane may have destroyed Patty's remaining connection to reality, convincing her that removing Diane or controlling Jack was the only way to restore the past. Yet Jack is not the man Patty remembers from 1982, and their relationship cannot be recreated. More than 40 years of history have changed both of them. Jack has built a family, experienced other marriages, endured losses, and made peace with many parts of his past. Patty, however, remains trapped in an emotional version of Genoa City that no longer exists. Her attempt to kill Jack may appear contradictory because she claims to love him. In Patty's damaged thinking, however, death may have seemed preferable to losing him permanently. If Jack could not belong to her, he could not be allowed to live happily with Diane. This is what makes her obsession so dangerous. Her love is no longer based on Jack's needs or choices. It is based entirely on possession. She wants control over his future, and when that control is threatened, she becomes willing to destroy the person she claims to cherish. Jack's eventual recovery will be essential to the case and to the emotional resolution of the story. When he learns that Patty returned to the hospital and tried to poison him, he may finally understand how close he came to dying a second time. He will also learn that Diane risked her own life to stop Patty. That knowledge could strengthen Jack and Diane's marriage, particularly after Patty's accusations created suspicion around Diane. Jack may feel guilt for the role his history with Patty played in the crisis, but he must also recognize that Patty alone is responsible for choosing violence. A confrontation between Jack and Patty could become one of the story's most powerful moments. Patty may expect sympathy from him, insisting that everything she did came from love or from the pain he caused decades earlier. Jack may acknowledge the mistakes of his youth while refusing to accept responsibility for her crimes. He could tell Patty that regret does not give her the right to attack Diane, manipulate Kyle, or decide whether he lives or dies. For the first time, Jack may completely reject the romantic fantasy Patty has preserved for decades. That rejection could either break through her delusion or send her into another emotional collapse. Diane's recovery will be equally important. The substance in Patty's syringe may cause serious but temporary symptoms, allowing Diane to survive while proving the deadly nature of the planned attack on Jack. Doctors will need to identify the drug quickly and administer treatment. Kyle may remain at her bedside while also checking on Jack, overwhelmed by the possibility of losing both parents in the same hospital. The parallel would be emotionally devastating. Jack lying in one room because Patty stabbed him, and Diane being treated nearby because Patty injected her during the pursuit.